Now we're going to talk about more, less, and fewer. You already know what more is, right? Less and fewer are opposite of more. We need to learn when to use less and when to use fewer. The reason we use more, less, and fewer is to make comparisons with nouns and verbs. First, and this is very important, you need to remember the difference between a countable noun and an uncountable noun. Countable nouns are things that we can count easily, right? Apples, oranges, people, flowers. With these ones, we use how many. And uncountable nouns are things that are impossible or impractical to count. For example, love, we can't count love, or water, or time, rice, flour, things like that. For those we use how much. With countable nouns, we're going to use more or fewer, and then that countable noun. Calls are countable. I can count them. I got 5 calls yesterday. I got 2 calls today. Because of that, if we want to compare the amount of calls that I receive, I'm going to use fewer because they are countable. In these examples, the first one says, I get more calls than you. So for example, today I got 5 calls and you got 2 calls. So I got more calls than you. And this means the same thing, but in the opposite order. Again, you got 2 calls, I got 5 calls, so you got fewer calls than I did. With uncountable nouns, we're going to use, again, more to compare, or we can use less. For example, in the first one, I spend more time on the phone than you. Time is not countable. We can't count times. We can count seconds, minutes, hours, but not time. In the second one, it says she drinks less water than he does. Water is uncountable. I can't count water. That's why I have to use less. I cannot use fewer with uncountable nouns, and I can't use less with countable nouns. With verbs, you're going to use this form. The verb first, then more or less, and then than. For example, she talks more than he does, or he talks less than her. We have the verb talk, more, and then than. Again, we have the verb talk, less, and then than. It's to compare the actions that people do. Some people do an action more than others, and some people do actions less than others. Sometimes we use do or does after than, so that we don't have to repeat the verb that we're comparing. For example, in the first one, it says, I talk more than you talk. We have talk here and talk here. That's repetitive, so we don't use that one. What do we do so that we don't use talk twice? We replace the second talk with do. I talk more than you do. And there we are. That one is a short word, but sometimes we need to replace a long phrase with do or does. For example, I use social media more than you use social media. Here we have this long phrase that we can replace with do. I use social media more than you do. That way it's shorter and it's not repetitive. And does, if we change this one to she and we add an S to uses, I use social media more than she uses social media. It sounds like a tongue twister, right? So we're going to replace uses social media for does, because she is a third person singular. That way it sounds better, it doesn't sound repetitive, and it's not as difficult to say.